The wolf would not move. 200 pounds of silver-marked direwolf, the prized hunting beast of the Alpha King himself, planted on the threshold of a cave high in the Ironback Ridge, ears flat, lip curled, every muscle locked. The king whistled. The wolf did not turn. The king called him by name. The wolf did not turn. The king walked up behind him, put a gloved hand on his shoulder, and tried to lead him back to the trail. The wolf snapped at his glove. Not hard, not deep, but enough. Enough that every man in the patrol froze in place and put a hand on his sword. That wolf had not snapped at a human being in 9 years of service. The Alpha King looked past his wolf into the dark of the cave mouth. He did not see anything. He smelled something, though. Old fear, old hunger, and underneath it faint 2 heartbeats. Slow, human, alive. His name was Kalen, third of his line, and what he found in that cave when his men finally lit their torches and went in would change the borders of his kingdom for the next 10 years. Stay with me. This one is bigger than it looks. To understand the silver direwolf and the cave and the 2 heartbeats, you have to back up 4 years. To a market day. To a stone bridge. To a moment that, in the city of Greyhold, every man and woman of the kingdom would later try to forget and never could. In Kalen's world, there were wolves. Not the 4-legged kind. Or not only the 4-legged kind. There were people who could become wolves. Whole villages of them. Whole kingdoms. They lived under pack law. They served in Alpha. They had ranks and roles, and the old ranks still meant something in the old families. Alphas led. Betas balanced. Omegas healed and harbored and held the heart of a pack together. An Omega was not weakness. An Omega was the door a pack walked through to find rest. To touch an Omega without consent, in any pack worth its name, was a crime that ended at the end of a rope. But the law of the kingdom was only as strong as the wolves who carried it. And not all wolves carried it. There were rogues. Outcast wolves with no pack and no alpha. Some of them hunted alone. Some of them, the worst of them, ran in loose packs of their own, and what those loose packs did, when they slipped between the cracks of the borderlands, was sell people. They called themselves traffickers. The kingdom called them rope pack. They took children. They took Omegas. They took anyone whose blood was thin enough to lift without a fight, and they moved them through the cave systems of the borderlands, the way ordinary men moved cattle. Their customers in the lawless lands east of the Ironback Ridge paid in coin and in older things than coin. 4 years before the morning of the cave, on a market day in Greyhold, 2 sisters had walked across a stone bridge to buy thread for their mother's loom. The older one was 13. The younger one was 10. They were Omegas. Their mother was an Omega healer, the best in the Greylands, the woman the king's own grandmother had once called for in her last illness. Their father had been a beta who fell at the eastern border 2 winters earlier. Their mother had raised them in a small stone cottage at the edge of the city, and on market days, when the cottage was warm and full of drying herbs, she sometimes let them go to the thread cellar alone. That market day, they crossed the bridge. They bought the thread. They started back. They never made it to the other side of the bridge again. What happened was that a covered cart had been parked at the foot of the bridge with its back door open. The driver was old and stooped. He had asked the older girl, politely, if she could read the writing on a parcel for him. His eyes were bad, he said. She had stepped close to read. The driver was not old, and his eyes were not bad, and there were 3 more men inside the cart, and by the time the younger sister opened her mouth to scream, a hand was already over it, and the cart was already moving, and the city watch, when they came in the afternoon to take down the description, took down 4 useless details and 1 true one. silver braid on the older sister's hair, a wooden bird on a string around the younger sister's neck, carved by their father before he died. Their mother, the healer, did not eat for 3 days. She did not sleep for 9. She walked the bridge 100 times. She walked the riverbank twice that. The king, then only 24 years old, only 2 seasons into his reign, mobilized 50 wolves to comb the borderlands for a month. They found 2 trafficker camps and burned them. They found bones. They did not find the sisters. After a year, the city stopped expecting. After 2 years, the healer stopped speaking to anyone except her patients. After 3 years, the king ordered a stone marker raised at the foot of the bridge with 2 names cut into it. Lyrian, age 13. Myra, age 10. He did not put a date of death on the marker because he could not bring himself to. He put only the date they had crossed the bridge. The healer did not come to the dedication. The king had not asked her to. 4 years. That is the number you have to hold in your head. 4 years. On the morning of the cave, the Alpha King rode out at first light with a patrol of 12. It was a routine ridge patrol. Ironbeck Ridge was the spine of the Greylands, a long crooked line of stone running north and south, full of caves and hollows and old hunter trails. The kingdom patrolled it once a moon to remind whatever rogues lived in those caves that the kingdom remembered they were there. Kalen rode patrols himself sometimes when he could not sleep, which was more often than his council liked. He had not slept well in 4 years. He did not say why. The men who rode with him pretended not to notice. His silver direwolf rode ahead. The beast had a name. Ash. Ash had been raised from a pup in the royal kennel, the only one of his litter who had survived a hard winter, and he had been Kalen's hunting companion since the king was 20. He was a rare thing. A direwolf was not a shifter. A direwolf was a creature in his own right, larger than an ordinary wolf, smarter than most men, and the silver-marked ones were rarer still. Ash had a silver streak running down his back from his shoulders to the base of his tail, and his eyes were the color of cold iron, and he obeyed Kalen and no one else. The patrol climbed the ridge as the sun came up. They passed 2 caves they always passed. They paused at a third for water. They were on their way down the back side of the ridge, the half nobody used, when Ash stopped on the trail. He did not slow. He did not whine. He just stopped, 50 feet ahead of the patrol, planted himself like a stone, and pointed his face at a cave mouth in the hillside above the trail. Kalen called him. Ash did not turn his head. Kalen called him again. Ash did not turn. The patrol caught up. Kalen dismounted, climbed up to where the direwolf stood, and put his gloved hand on the wolf's shoulder. Ash snapped at the glove. Not hard. Not deep. But enough. The patrol froze. "Sire," said the captain. "Slow. Careful." "I see it," Kalen said. He did not move his hand. He let Ash feel it there. Slowly, the silver direwolf turned his head and looked up at him. The iron eyes were not angry. They were not feral. They were begging. Kalen had known this animal since the wolf was small enough to fit inside his cloak. He knew the difference between Ash refusing an order out of stubbornness and Ash refusing an order out of something else. "What's in there?" Kalen said quietly. Not to the captain. To the wolf. The wolf put his nose to the ground at the edge of the cave mouth. He whined once, low in his throat. Then he sat down on the threshold, like a guard, like a thing that had decided. Kalen straightened up. He looked at his captain. "Torches." "Sire, the ridge caves usually." "Torches." "Now." 6 men. Drawn swords. Quiet. And nobody enters before I do. They lit the torches off the captain's tinder. Ash did not move from the threshold. He let the men step around him, one at a time as they entered. He did not follow. He stayed at the cave mouth, watching the trail like a dog who knew his job was outside. The cave was not a small cave. 20 feet inside the entrance, it bent left, sharply, and opened into a chamber the size of a barn. Kalen lifted his torch. Old fire pits, 10 of them in a rough circle. Bones in the ashes. Animal bones mostly. Some not. Empty wineskins. A rusted iron chain bolted into the rock at one end of the chamber. Another at the other end. Old ropes. Old straw. Old fear. He had seen rooms like this before. He had burned 3 of them. This was a trafficker hold. He turned slowly. The chamber was empty. The fire pits were cold. The straw was old. "Sir," said one of the men, kneeling at a fire pit. "These ashes. 8 days. Maybe 9. 8 days for the fire," Kalen said. "When did they leave?" The man pressed his palm into the ash. "Same. 8 days. Maybe a hair more. 8 days. They had cleared out 8 days ago. The patrol had been on this ridge 11 days ago. They had walked right past this cave 11 days ago." Kalen's jaw set. "Spread out. There's a back chamber. Find it." There was a back chamber. There was always a back chamber. They found it behind a stack of brush at the far wall. A narrow passage head high that ran back into the rock for 30 paces and opened into a second chamber, smaller, with 2 stone shelves cut into the walls. On those shelves were piled blankets. Old blankets. Trafficker blankets, the kind the rope packs used to keep their cargo from freezing. The blankets did not matter. What mattered was that the blankets were moving. The captain saw it first. He grabbed Kalen's arm. He did not speak. He pointed. The pile of blankets on the left shelf was rising. Slowly. Once. And falling. Once. The way a chest rises and falls. Kalen handed his torch to the man behind him. He drew his sword, not because he meant to use it, but because his men needed to see that he had drawn it. He walked to the shelf. He set the sword down on the stone. He took the corner of the top blanket between 2 fingers and lifted it back. A girl was under the blankets. She was curled on her side. Bone thin. Hair matted to her skull. Her eyes were closed and her mouth was open, and she was breathing in shallow, ragged little breaths like a thing that had forgotten how to do it well. She wore the remains of what had once been a child's dress. Around her neck on a fraying string hung a small wooden bird. A bird carved out of pine wood. By a man who had once known how to carve. Kalen's hand stopped in midair. "Myra," he said. The other shelf moved. He turned slowly. The captain had already lifted the corner of the second blanket. There was a second girl under it. Older. Taller. The same bone thinness. Her hair was longer and matted in a long braid she could not have been making for herself, and there were still a few threads of silver woven into the braid where it had been done once, in better times, by a mother's hands. She was awake. Her eyes were open. Her eyes were on him. She was not afraid exactly. She did not have the strength for afraid. She was watching him the way a small animal watches a large one. "Waiting." "Lyrian," Kalen said. The older sister blinked once. Slow. Like she was trying to decide if the name belonged to her anymore. The captain knelt by her shelf. He took her wrist gently and pressed his fingers to the pulse. He looked up at Kalen. He nodded once. Alive. Both of them alive. Kalen heard a sound behind him that he had not heard in himself in a long time. A small broken sound. He realized it was coming out of his own throat. He shut his mouth on it. "Water," he said. "Now. And blankets. Clean ones. Off our saddles. And get a runner down the ridge to Greyhold. Send for the healer. Send for their mother. Tell her—" He stopped. He swallowed. "Tell her daughters are coming home." The runner went. The water came. The men were as gentle as 12 hard wolves in armor know how to be, which is to say that 2 of them turned their faces to the wall while they worked, because they did not want anyone to see what their faces were doing. They lifted the younger girl, Myra, age 14 now, who had been 10 when she crossed the bridge. They wrapped her in 3 clean cloaks. Kalen carried her himself. They lifted the older girl, Lyrian, age 17 now, who had been 13 on the bridge. The captain carried her. They walked out of the back chamber. They walked out of the front chamber. They stepped over the threshold into the daylight. Ash was still sitting there. The silver direwolf had not moved in over an hour. He looked up at his king. He looked at the small bundle in his king's arms. He stood. He did not snap. He did not whine. He just walked alongside, the way he walked alongside wounded men coming off a battlefield, slow, measured, matching pace. "Hold on. Before we go down the ridge with them. Before you see what happens when this caravan reaches the bridge, and the healer who has not slept right in 4 years. If a story about a wolf who refused to leave a cave and 2 girls, a kingdom had stopped looking for hits you anywhere, take a second and hit that subscribe button. It costs you nothing. It tells the channel to keep telling the kind of stories where the small ones get to come home. Now, back to the ridge. They did not ride hard. They could not. Lyrian was too thin to take a horse's gait, and Myra had not yet opened her eyes, and so the patrol came down off Ironback Ridge at a walking pace, 12 men on foot leading their horses, the king in front carrying the smaller girl in his arms, the captain behind him carrying the older one, and the silver direwolf trotting alongside the king's left hip the whole way down. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say that the walk did not say on its own. By mid-morning, they came down to the river road. Word had run faster than they had. By the time they reached the stone bridge into Greyhold, the bridge had people on it. Not a crowd exactly. The captain of the city watch had cleared a path. But along the rails of the bridge on both sides stood the people of Greyhold. Quiet. Tradesmen with their caps off. Women with their hands pressed flat against their own mouths. The thread seller, the one the girls had been walking back from 4 years ago, was on his knees on the stones. He had been on his knees, the watch told Kalen later, since the runner had passed through an hour before. At the city end of the bridge stood the stone marker. Lyrian, age 13. Myra, age 10. The dates of the crossing, 4 years old. Beside the marker stood a woman. She wore the long green robe of a healer of the Greylands. She had not put on the robe in 3 years. The herbs at her belt were fresh. Her hair, which had been black when she crossed the bridge looking for her daughters 4 years ago, was almost entirely white now. She stood very straight. She did not move. She did not call out. She had been told by the runner what was coming up the road. She did not entirely believe it yet. She was waiting to believe it. Her name was Selah. The kingdom had once called her the Green Hand. The kingdom had stopped calling her anything in particular when she stopped speaking. Kalen came up the bridge. He stopped 6 paces from her. He went down on one knee, on the stones of the bridge with the small bundle still in his arms. Myra's matted hair was just visible against his cloak. Her eyes were closed. Her chest very faintly was rising. Falling. Rising. Falling. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "We found them in a cave. 8 days after the rope pack abandoned them. They are alive. They are weak. They are yours." He lowered Myra gently onto the stones in front of her mother. He stood up. He stepped back. Selah the healer went down on her knees. She did not make a sound. She put her 2 hands, the hands the king's grandmother had called for, the hands that had set bones and pulled fevers and saved more lives than the kingdom had stones in its walls, on the small chest of her younger daughter. She closed her eyes. She felt the heartbeat. She felt it. She felt it. Then her mouth opened, and a sound came out of her that did not belong on a city bridge in daylight. A sound from underneath 4 years of silence. The kind of sound a mother makes only once in a life, if she is lucky, because it means she had been preparing to make it forever and now did not have to. The captain behind Kaelin took a small step backward off the bridge and turned his face. 2 of the watchmen on the rail did the same. Kaelin did not turn his face. He stood there on the stones, and he made himself listen to it. Behind him, Lyrian stirred in the captain's arms. The older sister opened her eyes and looked, slowly, past Kaelin's shoulder, and saw her mother on her knees on the stones, and saw the wooden bird on her sister's chest, and made one word with her lips that nobody on the bridge heard but everyone on the bridge knew. "Mama." The captain knelt down too, and laid her beside her sister, and Selah the healer reached one hand to each daughter and put one palm on each chest, and she did not move from that position for an hour. Nobody on the bridge moved either. The thread seller stayed on his knees. The watch stayed at attention. Kaelin stood in front of his city and his court and his oldest unfinished failure, and he did not move. Ash the direwolf sat down on the stones beside the healer. He lay down. He put his great silver-marked head across her ankle. He did not let her be alone. When the hour was done, Selah the healer lifted her head. She looked at the king for the first time in 4 years. "They are dehydrated," she said. Her voice was rough from disuse, but the voice of a healer is a tool, and tools come back when you pick them up. "They are starved. The older one has a wound on her ankle that has been infected and is now healing badly. The younger one has not used her voice in long enough that I will need to coax it back. Neither of them has been touched in the way I most feared. The rope pack used them as cargo. They did not use them as anything else." Kaelin, who had not been certain his ribs would hold for the next sentence, let out a breath he had not known he was holding. "They will live," Selah said. "I will see to it. I would like a cart. I would like an escort. I would like my daughters in my own house, in my own bed by sundown." "Done," Kaelin said. She looked at him a moment longer. "And I would like the name of the man who decides what happens to the rope pack who took them," she said. "I would like to speak to him. Privately. When the sun comes up tomorrow." Kaelin met her eyes. "You are looking at him." "Good," she said. The cart came. The escort formed. The captain himself drove the cart slowly, with Lyrian and Myra, and their mother in the bed of it on clean straw and clean cloaks. The thread seller, of his own will, walked in front of the cart with his cap in his hand all the way through the city, and the people of Greyhold lined the streets, and not one person cheered, because cheering was not the shape of what was happening, but every door they passed opened, and behind every door stood somebody who had ever lost anyone, and they bowed their heads as the cart went past. Ash the direwolf walked beside the cart, at the rear wheel, and would not be persuaded to come away. That night, with Lyrian and Myra asleep in their mother's cottage, and a city watch doubled at the cottage gate, and his silver direwolf still lying on the doorstep with his head on his paws, Kaelin sat in his war room with 7 captains and 1 map. The map was the borderlands east of Ironback Ridge. It was marked with caves. 24 of them. He had memorized every mark. The rope pack abandoned that cave 8 days ago, he said. They left the girls because the girls were not worth taking further. They were starving. They were sick. They were going to die in transit. The rope pack cut their losses and walked, which means they are running their next cargo through one of these other caves right now. He set his palm on the map. Tomorrow morning at sunrise, I move 200 wolves into the borderlands. 20 at every cave on this map. We do not go in to scout. We do not go in to question. We go in to end this rope pack, and every rope pack we can reach by the same fires. I want every cave smoked clean. I want every member of this pack in chains by the end of the moon. The ones who run them down. The ones who fight, give them the choice their cargo never had. And I want every prisoner they took moved into the Greylands under Healer's care. The captains looked at each other. One of them said, 200 wolves is half the standing army, sire. Yes, Kalen said. The eastern border will hold for a moon without us. The traffickers will not. We move at sunrise. Nobody argued. They knew, looking at him, that this was not the kind of order you argued. At sunrise the next morning, before the 200 wolves rode out, Sayla the healer came to the king's hall. Alone. She was not escorted. She had walked from her cottage at the edge of the city through the gates and up through the streets in her green robe, and the watchman had simply opened doors for her one by one, and now she stood in the doorway of his hall, and her white hair was tied back, and her eyes were not soft. You said we would speak privately, sire, she said. He stood up from the war table. He cleared the room with a gesture. The 7 captains filed out. He met her in the middle of the hall. Speak. My daughters will need a long time, she said. Years, maybe. They have been frightened for 4 years. They have learned to be silent for 4 years. They will not unlearn it overnight. They will need a healer beside them, and they will need a city around them that does not stare, and they will need an alpha who does not forget them when the next thing on his table looks larger. They will have all 3. They will have a 4th thing also, she said. They will have me at this court. Not as a guest. Not as a favor. As a member. I am done being silent in my own cottage while my daughter's kidnappers walk the borderlands. I am the best healer in the Greylands. I have been a fool to deny that to a kingdom that lost 2 of my children. From this day, I am your court healer and your council advisor on matters of the wounded and the missing. You will not lose another child on my watch, sire. Do we understand each other? He did not even hesitate. We understand each other, Lady Sayla. Your seat is on the council from this hour. Bring your daughters to the hall when they are strong enough. I will hear them myself if they want to speak. She did not smile. She nodded. She turned and walked out. He watched her go. Then he walked out of the hall down the steps into the courtyard, where 200 wolves stood in formation under the morning sky, every one of them mounted, every one of them armed, every one of them looking at him. He did not give a speech. He gave 4 words. For the Omegas. Ride. They rode. What happened in the borderlands over the next moon was written down in 3 different chronicles, and not one of those chronicles got it quite right, because what happened was not the kind of thing chronicles are good at. 20 wolves at every cave. 20 caves opened in one dawn. 3 ropepack camps found and burned. 11 traffickers killed in the fighting. 23 taken in chains. A second cavern, deeper in the eastern hills, found by accident, and inside it 9 more prisoners, mostly Omegas, mostly children, every one of them brought out alive. A trader's hall in the lawless lands that had been buying rope-pack cargo for 6 years, burned to the ground by the king's own torch. A leader of the rope-pack, an old rogue called Drosk who had run the eastern corridor for 2 decades, brought back in chains to Greyhold, and judged in open court, and executed at the foot of the stone bridge with the marker on it. The marker was taken down the next day. The stones were not thrown out. They were put in the foundation of a new wing of the Healer's Hall, which Selah laid out herself, a wing for children brought back from the borderlands who needed a long, quiet place to remember who they had been. There would be more rope packs. Kaelin knew that. Selah knew that. But the corridor through Ironback Ridge was closed for a generation, and the price of running cargo through the Greylands had been written, in fire and in chains, in a way the lawless lands would remember. Now, here is the part that nobody put in the chronicles, because the chronicles were busy with the campaign and the council and the burnings, and they did not have room for a wolf. 3 nights after the cave, when the city had quieted and the campaign was being planned, and Lyrian and Myra were sleeping for the first night under their mother's roof in 4 years, Kaelin walked alone down the slope to Selah's cottage. He did not bring an escort. He brought one thing: a small iron bowl. In the bowl was a strip of warm meat from the king's own table. Ash the silver direwolf was still on the doorstep. He had not moved in 3 days. The healer had been bringing him water and bones, and he had taken them politely, but he had not left the door. Twice the kennel master had come down to lead him home. Twice Ash had refused to rise. Kaelin sat down on the step beside his wolf. He set the bowl down. The wolf sniffed it, did not eat. He looked up at his king with the iron eyes, which were tired now, the way a sentry's eyes get tired at the end of a long watch. "You knew," Kaelin said. The wolf did not answer. "Wolves don't. You smelled them through 8 days of stone and old fear, and you knew. I rode past that cave 11 days ago. I rode past it. You did not get to choose the patrol that found them. You did not get to choose the morning. You only got to choose, when we got there, to plant yourself on that step until somebody listened. So you did. You planted yourself. You snapped at my glove." He put one hand slowly on the great silver-marked head. "You are not going back to the kennel." Ash looked at him. "You have a new name from this hour," Kaelin said. "You are Threshold, because that is what you held. And you are a wolf of the king's hearth, not a wolf of the king's hunt. Your old place is honored, and your old place is closed. From tonight you sleep at my hearth in the great hall, and you walk in council, and when the door of my own house opens or shuts, you are the one who decides who walks through it. Do we understand each other?" The wolf, who had been a hunting wolf for 9 years, looked at his king for a long while. Then he stood up. He shook himself once slowly, like a thing setting down an old job. He stepped down off the healer's doorstep, finally, for the first time in 3 days. He walked beside the king back up the slope to the keep. He took up his new post that night at the king's hearth, and he held it for the rest of his life, and the children of the kingdom, in the years that followed, were taught his new name before they were taught the names of the seasons. Threshold. The wolf who would not move. Lyrian recovered. It took 2 years. She did not speak much for the first one. By the second she had begun to study under her mother, and by the third she had her own herb garden in the courtyard of the new wing, and by the 5th she was sitting in council beside her mother as the youngest healer ever recognized in the Greylands. She wore the silver braid again. Her mother braided it for her every morning, the way she had on the morning of the bridge. Myra recovered too. Slower. She did not speak for almost a year, and when her voice came back, it was a small voice and a careful voice, and she used it only with her sister and her mother for a long time. She kept the wooden bird around her neck. She slept with Threshold beside her bed for the first 6 months she lived in the keep, because the king had given the wolf permission to leave the hearth at night if Myra called for him, and she called for him most nights. By the time she was 16, she could walk the city alone, and by the time she was 17 she could cross the bridge alone, and by the time she was 18 she stood at the place where her name had once been cut into stone, and she put her own hand on the wall of the new healer's wing, and she said quietly, in a voice that nobody else needed to hear, "We are home." Selah became, in the end, the second seat on the king's council. Not a guest, not an advisor in name only. The second seat. Her green robe was folded into the council banner along the river. She drafted the new law on Omega protection that every city in the Greylands kept on its court wall. She trained 2 generations of healers. She never remarried, and she never stopped working, and the people of Greyhold called her the Green Hand again before the first winter was out, and this time she did not flinch when they did. Kaelin ruled for another 27 years. He sat his throne, and he kept his borders, and he kept his oaths, and on every market day for the rest of his reign, he walked across the stone bridge at dawn before the city was awake, alone, and he stood on the spot where the marker had once been, and he stood there for 1 minute and he walked on. And Threshold, the silver direwolf, lay at his hearth for 9 more years. He was old by the end. His silver streak had gone almost white. But he held the doorway of the king's hall the way he had held the cave mouth on Ironback Ridge, and when he died peacefully in his sleep, the king had him buried in the courtyard of the new wing of the healer's hall, under a flat stone with no name on it because his name was already known. Myra, who was 21 by then, carved a small wooden wolf and laid it on the stone the day he was buried. Lyrian planted a sapling beside it. Their mother stood between them with her hands on their shoulders, the way she had not been able to stand for 4 lost years, and she did not say anything. She did not have to. A wolf had refused to leave a cave. A king had finally listened. A mother had crossed a bridge to take her daughters home. A bloodline of healers had stepped into a council seat that had been empty too long. A rope pack had been broken, and a corridor had been closed, and a kingdom had remembered, in the only way kingdoms remember anything, by writing a new law and lighting a new fire and burying an old marker into the foundation of a new wing. 8 days in the dark. 4 years of silence. 60 seconds at a cave mouth where a silver-marked direwolf decided on his own that today was the day his king would not walk past. That is how Omegas come home in the Greylands. That is how the small ones get to live. And every child in Greyhold to this day, before they are taught the names of the seasons, is taught the name of a wolf. Threshold. The one who would not move.